It's a tale of breweries and pies as J. Ryan Stradal explores the sisterly relationships and the working class in the Midwest. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. And today's a bit of an unusual one, but also somewhat normal. Today's story is all about beer. I am referring to The Lager Queen of Minnesota by J. Ryan Stradal, which was published in 2019. For those who don't know, J. Ryan Stradal is an American writer from Minnesota. They've been writing for the past 10 years or so, a number of books and short stories, but they've also written nonfiction, history. Mostly their writing focuses on the Midwest, which you see in this book right here, but it also they also have written a book called The Kitchens of the Midwest or something like that, which is another fictional book that, of course, focuses on that area. And, given that Stradal is from the Midwest, it would make sense, write what you know. I think it's interesting because I grew up in the Midwest and I see a little bit of, my own upbringing in these types of, in this story that he's written. This is a pretty solid writer here. I really enjoyed his work, which I'll talk more about in the analysis section. I should note that I found this book at a bookshop in Denver when I went there for a conference, and so I'm really happy to sort of find this out of the blue. I don't think I would have known about it otherwise. And I should also note that I will spoil this book when I'm talking about it in the analysis section, not so much in the summary section. So if you want to, find out what happens in this book for yourself, I suggest you go out and find it and then come back and watch this video. But without further ado, let's talk about the Lager Queen of Minnesota. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So the Lager Queen of Minnesota focuses on a couple different characters. It focuses on primarily the relationship between Edith and her sister Helen. Edith is a nursing home cook. She likes to bake pies, and she's famous for her pies. She got some notoriety in a local newspaper, which brought some people from all over the state to try pie, and ended up having reservations at this nursing home, which is strange. The nursing home manager, took advantage of that and made a little bit of money, in which he gave some of it to Edith. But she couldn't enjoy it for very much longer because she eventually had to leave her job because her husband Stanley had to retire, and she had to take care of him because he developed a neurodegenerative disorder, dementia or something like that, and she had to really be there for him. The story also focuses again on her sister Helen. We see her story from the 50s until the modern day. At least at the time this was written, 2019, and so she loves beer so much that she starts brewing it herself, goes to college for chemistry, falls in love with the proprietor of a brewery that has seen better days. Might have been a little bit manipulative there, and she wants to take over that brewery and is somewhat successful in doing so. Edith, meanwhile, doesn't want to be out of work. And she doesn't have a lot of retirement money. So in the present day, she gets a bakery job. Stanley ends up dying of heart disease, and her daughter, unfortunately, also dies because of a car accident, and her daughter's husband dies, so she has to take care of her granddaughter, Diana. So the story partially focuses on Diana too. She's stealing to help pay the bills, doesn't tell Edith about this, and is engaging in a lot of cons and schemes to just keep the family afloat. And Diana is surrounded in a community that has some more money than her, and she's upset about that. And then we see back in the past, Helen's mother dies in 1965. She talks to her father about who he's going to pass down the family farm to, and says that Edith would just sully away the money or whatnot, doesn't really want to run a farm, but Helen wants to start a brewery. And so she plans to do something with the money and make many times more than that. And her father, puts her in the will to have the farm. But Helen doesn't tell Edith. And when it happens, Helen is going to call Edith, but she hangs up the phone first, and then she writes a letter to Edith where she explains what happened and how Edith will be rich in the future because Helen's going to make a lot of money. Very egotistical there. Edith never responds, and there's a 50-year gap of when they do communicate with each other, which is a huge part of the story here. And then Diana eventually gets caught stealing by a man named Frank, who wants to press charges, but instead puts her to work in his brewery, which Diana starts as like a young brewmaster, but quickly works up and becomes quite good and creates her own craft IPA, a type of beer, India Pale Ale. And then Diana also marries the beer rep for the that helps sell her beer, and they try to start a family. She has miscarriages, but eventually is able to give birth. Frank, the brewery owner, dies, and his wife doesn't want to continue it, so she sees potential in Diana and sells her the brewery, and Diana is able to successfully open it with the help of her grandmother. And from there, the rest of the story takes place. What happens with the brewery, with Diana, with Helen, with all these characters, you'll have to read to find out. But that's pretty much how the story progresses. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about with the Lager Queen of Minnesota. This is a pretty stellar story. I will note that I got Stoner vibes from it. Stoner by John Williams, a story about essentially a man who goes to college for English, gets a PhD, and teaches English at that college, lives a very mundane life, and at the end wonders, whether it was all worth it, and he argues that it was worth it. There's a lot more to that story. It can be seen as very boring, and I think that might be happening a little bit with this story. Like, there's certainly not too much excitement with beer. It's beer, at least according to me. But I think there's some elements of the beauty in the mundane, and these people living honest, hard-working lives in the face of adversity and other things. So I do have to give Stradal credit for sort of carrying on that feeling from Stoner. It might not have been his intention. He might have never read Stoner, but if it's high marks for me because I absolutely love Stoner to be able to say that something is like it. But one of the main things that Stradal is doing here is he's comparing Edith and Helen, sort of exploring the sisterly relationship there. So the story is partially centered around the differences and the similarities between the two sisters. Edith is a stubborn woman, just a very stubborn individual. She's very focused on her inner world, doesn't really share a lot about herself with others because they don't need to know, or it's improper to tell them. Very much of the mindset of the classic Midwestern woman. Everyone has their private lives. She loves to keep busy. It seems like she doesn't really have a purpose unless she's keeping busy, even in her old age. And that's partially because she doesn't have a retirement, but to some extent she wouldn't feel comfortable if she wasn't keeping busy in some way, which is a similarity with her sister because Helen is in her 70s, has enough money to retire, but still wants to work the brewery. So, they're more alike than they might think. And she doesn't like to put things on others. She likes to deal with things herself, which isn't necessarily the most healthy, but that's the way that Edith was brought up. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. Sure, she could use help, but she didn't have the emotional steadiness or ability just then to choose and allocate helpful tasks for them. The last thing she wanted to do was call around and be disappointed by what people were unwilling or unable to do. On the days when she lacked the energy or willpower to cook, she just needed dinner to magically appear and not feel as if she had been demanding or needy. And although she's that's her mindset when her husband dies, Stanley, that still feels like a huge part of Edith's overall character. She doesn't want to be seen as demanding. She doesn't want to be seen as needy. She just wants to get through life and deal with what she can. If she's not doing financially well, that's unfortunate. There were times when she was financially well, and they will always make ends meet, which I want to say, just demonstrates her inner world, demonstrates her need to just keep her head down and hope that she can keep marching forward. And meanwhile, Helen is very aggressive in life. She takes what she wants. She's kind of manipulative in that way. I'm pretty sure that's how she got her husband, because it's described like she just sort of gets closer to Orville, her husband, once she finds out that his family owned a brewery, and kind of puts herself in his life. There might be some love there, but it definitely seems like she manipulated her way in there so she could get what she wanted out of life, which is to own a brewery. She's a very social creature as well, and everything sort of seems transactional to her. Like, every conversation, every relationship seems to be, what can I get out of? And there are a lot of people in her life who later go on to show her that that's maybe a wrong way of thinking, because you're not going to really be able to connect with others, and your life's just sort of going to pass you by. And I do think Helen and Edith are very similar, but they're also quite different in that regard. There's a lot of competition between them, especially early in life. I think their mom tried to put a stop to it, because Helen at one point wanted to bake pies, which Edith is great at. But Helen's mom noted, if you start baking pies, it's going to become a competition between you and your sister. And baking pies is the only thing Edith is good at, and you'll take that from her, and that's not good. So the mother kind of realizes that. I think a stubbornness also just keeps them apart. Both of them kind of unwilling to be the first one to reach out after their separation over the inheritance, with Helen believing that Edith should be grateful that one day she'll bring her a lot of money, and Edith believing that Helen kind of cheated her and never, anytime they fell in hard times, it was Helen's fault for what she had done, which there is some truth to that. But I do think that there is a reunion, like the reunion that takes place at the end of the story is very beautiful. And I think it happens when they drop their sort of hesitations, their sort of faults. Like, Helen realizes that life doesn't have to be transactional. She doesn't have to keep focusing on money and her own legacy and herself. It's okay to think about other people and accept that she was wrong in what she did with the inheritance. And Edith, for her part, she drops the grudge that she's holding, but also understands, in entering the brewery in the first place when helping Diana, she realizes that Helen's going to come back to her eventually because of that. So her attempt to step into brewery is taking a different direction in life, understanding that not everything has to be the consistent or the same, just sort of opening up and trying something new, which is important for Edith. I do have the question, though, because there is a emphasis on forgiveness, especially at the end of the story. But should Helen be forgiven for what she did to Edith, given that for Helen's decision to take all the money from the inheritance kind of left Edith stranded at times, not really sure what to do, and Diana and Edith had to apply for food stamps and rely on a social safety net that is ever increasingly dwindling, and Helen never bothered to look back, because this is just the way things should have worked out. And eventually, Helen would pay back Edith, which she never did 50 years on. It's pretty unfortunate and problematic there. So I would argue that, there needs to be forgiveness, because you can't hold on to grudges forever, especially between your sisters. But there might be some things that kind of merit, a closer look and understanding why Helen behaved that way, because, she caused a lot of suffering in her action, and that should be addressed. You shouldn't let some people get off scot-free in that regard. Another important element of this story is income disparity, which I was not expecting from this story. But Stradal highlights the struggles of the working class in this story, specifically with Edith, with Diana, with them trying to make their way through life in a world that is getting increasingly hard and financially difficult to live in. and comparing that against Helen's luxuries. So yeah, like Edith struggles, like she's barely making ends meet while Stanley has a job, and after he retires she has to take on extra jobs. Like she's working at the brewery and she's working at Arby's, and she's hoping that she can also work at another retirement home in the future. She's taken on all these jobs partially because she needs to work, but also she needs to help Diana. There's a lot of work, and Diana equally has to worry about how she's going to help her family as well, because she's stealing to just give the family a little bit extra. And while yes, it is bad to steal, I think it's fair that Stradal kind of offers no judgment in this story, arguing that there's really nothing else that she could do. There's no other jobs, there's no other like financial support they can get because they're already on food stamps. She's kind of at her wit's end. It's like it's kind of bad, but also these people weren't doing anything with the stuff that she was stealing, so it can't be that bad. So while Stradal's not exactly condoning it, he is offering a reason, or offering like insight into why people would do that in the first place, which is a whole lot more empathy than most people get in these types of situations. What's also interesting is that the 2008 recession is prominently highlighted in this story, especially as a reason for Edith losing one of her jobs. Because of the bakery owner having multiple houses and whatnot, and just noting that those people and like the bankers and whatnot, like their excesses and whatnot resulted in harm being done to the lower classes, which still hasn't been fixed to this day as I'm talking about this 2004 or 2025, sorry. And I'm not coming to you from the past or anything, but like the people in power are still trying to make it so that the 2008 recession could happen again. So it's easy to see how Diana and Edith could get into these situations, and how Helen's luxury, she makes a lot of money and she promised it to Edith, but she never gave it to her. And Edith is more of a ruthless businesswoman than anything else. Like she focuses so much on that, and there's little to no thought about how she got there, or how she's going to support people who might be in need, especially if they're close family. Of course, at the end of the story, Helen ends up giving Diana and Edith $1 million to sort of make up for what has happened in the past. And even Frank, the former brewery owner, offers some charity to Diana in the form of giving her a job. So I do have to wonder if Stradal's arguing that maybe there needs to be some charity from the wealthy, like we should rely on the good graces of rich folk to finally see the errors of their way, which we've seen in reality rarely actually happens. I'm much more partial to believe that the government just needs to create a stronger safety net, which isn't really the scope of Stradal's work here, but arguing that there needs to be charity from the wealthy, while it's not a strong point, it's overall there, like it's something worth noting in the story. It does feel a little bit problematic. Stradal is also talking about the ones we've lost, talking about death quite a bit in this story. He makes loss a key part of the story. Edith and Helen both experience losses, and as well as Diana. Edith loses her daughter and her son-in-law. She loses her mom, her father, and also her husband. And all of these losses take a toll on Edith, and Helen suffers too. Diana loses Frank, who is a great employer for her. He's pretty important in her life, really guiding her and putting her on the right direction as she becomes a brewmaster. So loss is a very heavy part of the story. And as I mentioned before, it does take its toll over time. Eventually you kind of realize that maybe death is like you become numb to it at a certain point. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. It occurred to Diana just then that death doesn't happen all at once. The public death is just the beginning, and the rest takes as long as it has to in private bits and pieces, without any warning, schedule, or validation. A pen they once held, now out of ink, a bag of their favorite chips past its expiration date, a crack in a personalized coffee mug. She wondered who else in her life had put away somewhere a dry pen, expired chips, a broken mug, an aging bottle of beer. She wondered who had the courage to let them go without ceremony or reflection. And that's an interesting passage there, where Diana is just acknowledging that, that death has happened, and like you're used to it after a while, which is not really good, but like it doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly over time, and eventually you come to realize like all the loss that you felt, and it hits you pretty hard, I think is the thing. She uses like chips and cups and things like that in that passage. But partially she's referring to the brewery, like after Frank dies, like the death of the brewery is pretty significant, and that happens to Helen too. Once she sees that Blotz, the brewery company, has seen better days and is now slowly going out of business, like there's a mourning of that, not only of people but of things that you become used to, of places that were big parts of your life, and once they're gone, it just there's no replacing them. But Stradal also notes that death is inevitable. It's just going to happen. And the story is very pessimistic in that regard, because he's just acknowledging all this death that Edith and Helen have suffered, that Diana has suffered. It comes for us all. And Edith even seems to acknowledge that you just have to continue through it. It's bad, but you have to make it through it so that it doesn't pull you down, because if it pulls you down, then you're no help to anyone else, which is an unfortunate way of thinking about death, because it seems to offer no time for real reflection until long after it has happened. But Edith would argue that, death has happened, but you still have those positive memories that you need to hold on to and cherish. But even with that seemingly hopeful tone, especially at the end of the story, there is still a lot of bleak pessimism that Stradal is throwing our way. There are other great elements of this story too. The focus on beer, especially the knowledgeable focus on beer, really puts you in the mindset of the brewmasters, kind of like how Moby Dick puts you in the mindset of whalers and whatnot. Maybe not as in-depth, but certainly pretty thorough. Midwest life as well is very prevalent in the story. Being from the Midwest, again, I saw a lot of my own life in this story. A place that I left some time ago, but it's still always there in my memory. Maybe a nostalgic feeling that other people might not get if they weren't necessarily from the Midwest. But you see a lot of like small town life in this story, close-knit families, and just certain ways of thinking about sharing information and whatnot. People's love of beer, especially in the Midwest, becomes a prevalent part of this story. Eugene is a character in the story that I haven't really talked about all that much. He's Edith's son, and he's kind of a very lazy, no responsibility kind of guy, always getting into trouble and financial troubles and whatnot. And at various points in the story, he takes money from Edith, but later he's seen working in the brewery. Like there's a change over time for him where he becomes slightly more responsible. And it's a very interesting kind of background story that Stradal doesn't immediately call attention to. It would have been like fascinating for there to be like a separate book about his journey, but that would kind of ruin the sort of novel feel of this happening in the background, making you wonder what's going on with Eugene, making him a more fascinating character in that regard. And then there is also, feminist elements to the story, women willing to hire other women, noting, sexism in certain industries, and that sort of thing, and it sort of brings a fresh take on this story, especially for the Midwest. But there is a fair amount of feminism that takes place in the Midwest, so this isn't necessarily like changing any of that, or sort of undermining the realistic nature of the story. Like especially around the time that this was written, there was a desire to give women more positions of power in companies, to sort of change the diverse nature of those companies, to change the hierarchy and try to do new things and give women opportunities to elevate themselves, which I think have since kind of fallen by the wayside now that Trump has been reelected. But there are hopefully ways where we can continue progress in that regard. And understand that, just because women are in positions of power, that doesn't necessarily mean change. Change has to come from the different ways that we view women and seeing them more than just sex objects or something like that. One last thing that I'll note about this story is I don't have much or anything really to complain about. I will say that Helen and Diana meet in the story with like 20 or so pages to go. I do have the question that maybe Helen and Diana or Helen and Edith should have met sooner, and there should have been more of a struggle. I thought that was the way that the story was going to go, with Diana becoming a brewmaster and coming at odds with Helen and her company. Maybe something about the need for change or something reflected there, which there is that reflected in the story, but it comes much later. Like maybe that'd be half the story rather than just the rest of the 20 pages. But I don't think that necessarily sinks the book that Stradal doesn't do that, because we still see Helen's journey and how she eventually reaches Diana. It's particularly interesting with like Helen coming to understand Edith and Diana without actually ever having talked with them. Like her journey is one of a different kind of struggle, and it's still compelling, even if it doesn't necessarily result in a confrontation of styles or ideas between Edith and Diana and Helen. But I still would have liked to have seen that. So maybe that's just me wanting a different type of story, and if so, I should write that type of story. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the Lager Queen of Minnesota, a very fascinating and well-written book. I was not expecting to enjoy it this much, but I really thoroughly like it, and I have a very high opinion of it. So I definitely recommend it to you out there. Go find it at your local library, or perhaps a local bookstore might have this book waiting for you. If you have any thoughts on it, or you want to comment on my review here, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you and have a discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about this short story this book, or this author, in case they don't already know. Join the Discord if you want to have further conversations about such things. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and beer tasting travels. Farewell.